I do think we have a crisis of especially young men in this country, and they're, in many ways, disconnected from the rest of their families, disconnected from their communities, disconnected from our political culture, disconnected from our civil culture. And that's a real problem for a society that depends on all of us to be engaged and working together to make it as good of a country and as good of a society as it can be.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of Common Sense View. If you're coming for the first time, please don't forget to subscribe. If you have been here before, let's roll. Now, in the modern world, men, both men, boys, and anything in between, have been in one part subjected to a lower class of being, and in another part hyped as being more equal than the women. And this has been evident and more evident since the advent of feminism, the modern feminism, and this contemporary feminism, whose mantra is, I don't need men. But the problem with this is that after a long time, it is acceptable by everyone. But at a certain point, you realize that men, especially the boys, are almost forgotten, literally forgotten. They can't even show their emotion without being laughed at, both by fellow boys and the girls. There's no organization or institution or any part of the authority looking out for them. When they're being looked out for is in a whole, not men or boys department. And that has affected how we think, how we reason, how we behave, how we act with and around boys. Especially, I talk about boys because if you are my age, you have learned how to deal with it. But boys, especially teenagers who are still struggling to find their own identity, to route their ship to the right direction, they have a doubt. They don't know what actually is the way to follow. And this is a big issue. Especially this time around, whereby anything you do with or to a woman has a special interpretation. If you're not a misogynist, you are an authoritarian, or you are aggressive. Now, a lot of people have done a lot of social experiments to figure out this, whereby you see a woman hitting a boy along the road. It's just a prank. And everyone will laugh, smile, and giggle. And in a few minutes, they turn around and do the same experiment with the boy beating a woman. And you will see the entire street, both men, women, child, everything, will rush the guy to teach him a lesson. It's not supposed to be that way. It's obvious that we are supposed to protect women as a society, even though at this point in time they say they don't need men's help, most of them. But it's something that is inherent in men to protect. When you take that away, and you also take away their ability to show their masculinity by calling them toxic masculines, you literally emasculate them. The boys have no bearing. They have no place to follow, and they have no group that recognizes the energy that pumps in them that they don't know how to channel. And at the end, they become gang members, because in a gang, the hierarchy that is what men are known for is explicit. Everyone knows his place. Now, bring down to the just concluded election. The Americans saw, they saw, and those who are conquered, we are conquered. The Democrats positioned Kamala as the messiah that was coming. After bashing her as incompetent, as a drag on Biden's re-election journey, they twisted themselves 180 degrees and rebranded her into this perfect candidate for the presidency of the United States. Now, the truth is coming out, because in one of the posts lately exposed, you heard Kamala's campaign inner circle saying that there was no single poll, none, that showed that Kamala was ahead of Trump. But that was not the picture they painted. The picture they painted was that the vibe was excellent. That the vibe was transforming everyone that has been against the Democrat into a Democrat voter, despite the fact that every metrics was against the ruling party. But on this episode of Scot Jeany, I call it episode of because he is the only sent voice in the entire media, left media, a CNN anchor. He schooled the crew about what the plight of men is. The reason, what I think the reason, or what he believes is the reason why most men across cultures voted Donald Trump instead of Kamala Harris. Men are forgotten. Their needs are forgotten. When they are not forgotten, they are placed second place. They are judged harshly by the society they are supposed to be member of. They are also judged harshly by fellow men, because whether we like it or not, men live by hierarchy. When you come inside the room as a man or as a boy, you know your place. You don't need to be insulted. You don't need to insult yourself either. You just go and take your place. And the same thing, those on the higher level of the food chain also know their place. Some of them come down a little bit to associate. It is easier than to go up to mingle, except if you are invited. Now, Scott schooled them about what is an explicit reason, or one of them, why men overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump. Though a billionaire, he was able to decipher their needs in their own universe of discourse. He realized what their needs are. He realized that they have been forgotten for a long time. He realized that the justice system has been used against them a lot of time. And not just in the United States, but across the globe. For example, there was a just concluded case in the UK, McGregor and the woman that accused him of raping her. I don't want to make an unusual claim, but go and read that case. Everything about it doesn't make any sense. That was why she couldn't go anywhere with it in a criminal court. And the only way she can find a reprieve was in the civil court, whereby the threshold is much lower. And now, if the threshold being lower is good thing for her, what happens to the man who is now a criminal for something he said was consensual and the girl said was not? And evidence from my own perspective showed that if anything happened that night, it was not beyond consensual. But who am I to judge? This is not the only case against men. You're not allowed to speak up or act out without being judged as being aggressive. If you criticize anything the women did, you are a misogynist. You can hardly tread the line whereby you have a legitimate criticism, direct criticism against an action of a woman without seeing somebody somewhere calling you a misogynist. Scott Jeany was able to articulate this into what seems to be a moment of truth to the CNN crew. And for me, moment of truth to the entire US media, an entire left-wing media of the world, and actually entire political structure of the West that is gradually seeing the institution, liberal democratic institution they built over hundreds of years, slipping out of their hand, going back to populism because nobody wants to lose their identity. They forgot that the people that voted them in have a country to protect. They were not born all over the world. And we who visited the country have a way we have to behave. At least, the bottom line, to behave like the owners of the country and not to force them to change their way of life. Once this primary knowledge is forgotten or is ignored, it becomes a free fall. And the women who make most of the decisions at home, now making most of the decisions in the offices, in the government, still have upper hand. Nobody said that they shouldn't, because we have come a long way in the modern world. The women should have a lot of say. But the men should also be recognized. Their plight should be recognized. Patriarchy, or whatever it is called, is not the problem. The problem is the dichotomy we are creating between men and women, forgetting that both the feminine energy and the masculine energy is needed to build a perfect society. So, in view of that, let us just have a look on this moment of truth that exploded in the face and the faces of the CNN crew, as it is painstakingly given by Scott Jeany.
I do think we have a crisis of especially young men in this country, and they're, in many ways, disconnected from the rest of their families, disconnected from their communities, disconnected from our political culture, disconnected from our civil culture. And that's a real problem for a society that depends on all of us to be engaged and working together to make it as good of a country and as good of a society as it can be. I think the Democrats in this election made men feel like that the patriarchy is over, boys, and we're going to put you in the back seat for a while, and you're just going to have to accept it without any thought to the ramifications of telling people who are out honestly trying to make a living, provide for their families, be good husbands, be good fathers. When you tell people who are doing their level best that either A, it's not good enough, or B, you're part of the problem, what do you expect? And then finally, as a political tactic, the attempt to put walls on the ticket, and that was going to somehow solve all of the problems that had been built up for years, was ridiculous, because it turns out Walz was the last person that men wanted to hear from. And I remember at the beginning of that whole campaign, when they put him on, I sat right here, and people were like, oh, they got camouflaged hats. They're going to be wearing them in the deer stands this fall. And I think to your point that you just made, that was not that idea that it was not formulated by a bunch of dudes who actually go deer hunting. It was come up with by a bunch of people who've never met a dude that actually goes deer hunting. But when you try to put that kind of window dressing on a real communications problem or a real relationship problem, it gets exposed immediately.
As you can see, if you have been following this crew in CNN, you will bear with me that this is the first time no single person interrupted him while he was talking. Why? Because facts don't lie. Facts don't lie. You cannot recategorize men into something they are not. Those men they are husbands. Those men are brothers. Those men are uncles. Those men are colleagues. They are fathers. They are grandfathers. But we try to find a way to recreate them into a monster that are totally against women. If all of these men, brothers, uncles, husbands, fathers, grandfathers are against women, who is for women? Who is for women? The fact is that they forgot that in every coin there are always two sides. And you cannot get both sides at the same time. The same way, men are not a single voting bloc that they must go one side. If you apply the same principle to women, the black women voted Kamala around 98%, as against 2% that voted Trump. Can we just say that it is also good that black men should vote Trump 98% and white men the same thing? No, it doesn't work like that. People have the reason why they vote for somebody. If you're not voting for your economy, you're voting for your rights, or you're voting for both. But if you have family, you realize that you do what is best for your family. But all of the arguments are centered on this racism, sexism, misogyny, and all these segmentations of identity that are actually not the reason why people voted the way they did. As we see as this post progresses, a lot of people that made up the voting bloc of Donald Trump were all in the left, including Trump himself. And the question is, why did they leave the left? Why did they leave the left? Why did the women who voted against Trump in 2016 and 2020 vote him overwhelmingly this time? Why did the men who voted overwhelmingly against Trump in those two elections vote for him this time? There must be a reason. Nothing happens in a vacuum. But the left-wing media refuse to see the reason. They have a special reason why people refuse to vote for Kamala. It's actually not about facts. It's not about the immigration. It's not about economy. It's not about safety. It's not about crime in the street. It's not about catch and release. It's not about the illegal immigrants killing people randomly in their country. Let us see what the MSNBC crew believe is the reason why Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump in today's America.
Cannot ignore there is still a lot